Hello, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this installment of Vantage Point, a speaker series hosted by the Worldwide College of Business. The series was created to increase connections to the industry by offering a platform for thought leaders to discuss topics which impact and improve business and organizational performance. As Dean of the College of Business, I wish you a very, very warm welcome, and I'm very excited to introduce to you a dynamic speaker from a very exciting background, Mr. David Edelman. David is a highly sought after advisor on digital transformation and marketing strategies. He is a developer of foundational business concepts, including the customer decision journey and segment of one marketing. Most recently, as Chief Marketing Officer at Aetna, he guided Aetna, now part of CVS Health. Many of you may already know that through becoming a digitally oriented, customer-centric enterprise. Before Aetna, David built practices for the Boston Consulting Group, otherwise known as BCG, Digitas, and then for McKinsey and Company, focusing on global digital transformation. David has been recognized by Forbes as one of the most influential CMOs in the world, and by Adweek as one of the top 20 marketing and technology executives. His writing and work have attracted over 1.1 million, with an M, followers to his LinkedIn blog. Wonderful, impressive. And he has delivered dozens and dozens of keynote presentations at conferences around the world. Currently, David is a senior lecturer in marketing at Harvard Business School. He also advises CEOs and CXOs in health and marketing services, focusing on where AI and personalization unlock transformational opportunities. David, we're so grateful to have you and share your wisdom with us, all of us in the audience, including faculty and folks from industry. So before I turn it over to David, I do want to make a point to mention that I invite you, our viewers, to ask any questions you have through the question and answer icon. Please, and then Matthew and or Michelle will be taking those questions to David. And now it is my absolute pleasure to introduce and invite David to the stage. David, please, thank you for being here, and the floor is yours, my friend.
Great. Well, thank you, Manish, and hello, everybody. I think it's maybe best to open up with a story. Because we all have interesting experiences, and to talk theoretically about where customer experience is going without actually talking through an experience just seems way too theoretical. So a few years ago, not that long ago, probably around 2016, my town, Lexington, Massachusetts, where I live, passed an ordinance that gave incentives to people who would be putting in solar panels into their house. And we had been looking into solar panels. I had been looking online, and that action by the town triggered an avalanche of emails and mail and all kinds of stuff from companies marketing services to put in solar panels. It was quite a deluge. And it was hard to figure out what was what. A lot of it was just pretty generic, and everybody desperately trying to just simply get an appointment and come into my house. And it was hard to figure out who was who. But one stood out. And one piece of mail came to me that had a personalized URL. The company's name was called Sungevity. And when I typed in that URL, so this was actual physical mail that came to me that had a URL with my name and my address as part of the URL code, I was intrigued to figure out what that might lead to. So I typed that in to my browser, and boom, right in front of me was a Google Earth image of my home. Superimposed on my home were images of solar panels on my roof. They had calculated how many solar panels could actually fit on my roof, and they had a running calculation on the side of the image of how much electricity those solar panels would generate based on the angle of my house and what they expected to be tree cover. And I forgot longitude, latitude, but whichever one, wherever I was, and the way the angles of the sun go. They also pulled information from Zillow about the square footage of my house and used that to estimate the actual energy consumption that I would likely have. They also knew that my house was serviced by gas as well as electric, so they had taken off what they thought would be gas supported. And then they calculated how much savings I could actually get through solar panels. So how much of my electrical use could actually be displaced by solar panels, which turned out to be 25%. For those of you at the school down in Daytona, it could be, I'm sure, a lot more. But nonetheless, that was significant and interesting to us, and especially with the incentives from the town. So then, after looking at that, it said, click here to talk to a representative who can walk you through how those savings actually work. So I click on the link, and then I am moved immediately into a video chat. And this was in the very early days of video talking, before COVID and before Zoom became big. And that person immediately, he had all of the information about me right then and there. Greeted me by name, Mr. Edelman. I see that we can save you 25% of your electricity bill through solar, and I'm excited to walk you through how this actually works. And so I had an extremely productive conversation with this sales rep. He asked me a few questions to just clarify things about my home. And in the course of that conversation, told me about the different ways that the whole system could be financed. And it wasn't that simple because there's a whole lot of issues around. You can store electricity, you can send electricity back into the grid and get paid for it. There are tax incentives. All of this adds up, and it's actually not a simple calculation. But he walked me through it very calmly, visualizing on the side how that calculation worked. Then he explained that there were 3 different kinds of lease options or an option to buy and how those worked. And then he sent me a link to a video that would explain in even more depth about these, and also something that I could share with my wife so we could talk it through. So, end of the call, I've got the link, and then I watched the video. The video was extremely simple and very clear about how the leasing options worked. And basically, after 8 years, the lease is completely paid off, and they pay it off through the savings. And I won't get into all the complexities there, but it basically was very clear that for 8 years, I was essentially break even. I wouldn't save money, but 25% of my electrical use would be through solar. And then after that, the savings would start accruing. And if I didn't, they would refund the balance to me as part of the contract, which, by the way, in a couple of years, they actually did. Then, after the video, you can go back in, click, and talk to somebody and work through the deal. He said, would you like to talk to some people in your neighborhood who have already had the solar panels from Sungevity and worked with us? Yes. So he sends me the email link to them. I didn't know those people, even though they were in my town. I send them an email. They tell me about the aspects of the experience. It was all extremely positive. And so then I sign up, I do it, and then they send me a link to an app, which I download, that gives me all of the updates on when they're going to come to install it. And then that app, on an ongoing basis, becomes the way I would actually track all of my energy use, the savings, if there were any issues. And by the way, I did have an issue once where a squirrel ate a wire. They actually sent me an alert right away because they could tell it wasn't generating what it should. and all the scheduling and everything just goes incredibly smoothly through that app. We are going to judge brands, and in fact, we're already doing it based on the seamlessness of the experience that they offer through all the stages of what a customer journey might be, the quality of the information and how that information is used along the way, the amount of time and effort that we have to, or better yet, don't have to put in, and then the accessibility over time in case there's any kinds of issues or things like that, the ability to communicate and go back and forth and actually have some kind of tether with a company that is credible. And all of those kinds of aspects are things that go into our minds as we evaluate more and more the brands who we want to do business with. It's certainly the basis of brands such as Uber, Airbnb, and newer brands that are able to do this kind of customer journey design from scratch and build their whole system and value proposition based on that. But increasingly, I'm starting to see this pop up in healthcare, in telecom, in financial services, starting in travel, although there's a lot of different parties to coordinate in travel, which is true also in healthcare. But it is definitely becoming a way that more and more companies are challenging themselves to be more customer centric. And by customer centric, it means taking the attitude of the customer, looking at all the different points of that journey, and figuring out how to use information and process to string that together into a distinctive experience. Doing so, though, is not just a question of having the cool AI algorithms that Sungevity had to through the data from Google Earth and from Zillow and to put that all together. Yes, that was an AI type capability that they used to scan and spot houses for whom the economics would work. But it also means having the right kind of processes in place, really linking things all together so that the handoffs are clear. And let me give you a contrasting example where this didn't work. My daughter, just before COVID, was in a program, an exchange program for college, and was over in Paris. My wife and I decided we would go over and visit her and the host family that she was staying with. I got a credit card from one of the major banks that seemed to market itself based on being useful for travelers. You get extra points if you use it for plane tickets, you get free foreign exchange, and it seemed like it was perfectly designed for travelers. So I get the credit card, I use it to buy the flight to Paris, we land in Paris. I go to use the card to buy some chocolates in a beautiful chocolate store in Paris, and immediately I hit a brick wall because it's the first time I'm using this credit card and I'm using it in a foreign country. Well, isn't that the purpose of the credit card? Didn't they have the data because I bought the plane ticket? Couldn't they have sent me even just a text and said, is this really you? But no, that the charge was rejected and I was told to call the phone number on the card. So I had to step out of the store and it was just an incredible hassle. But it's a perfect example of where different functional groups have not been working together to create a seamless experience. And so that is a huge part of thinking from the customer's lens. And there are companies now, and one that I'm going to talk about, Comcast, who are trying to make big strides in rethinking the whole way they interact with customers. Comcast is not a brand from a legacy perspective that had a great image in the minds of people from a customer service perspective. And it even led to a movie called The Cable Guy that wasn't terribly flattering about the people who might come to your house to deal with your cable TV. And they knew that this was an issue. It was an issue that, especially as new competition was going to come in from the likes of AT&T and Verizon, so they would have less of a monopoly in most of their markets, they needed to up their game. They also wanted to get into mobile telephony and offer Xfinity Mobile. And so they had to find an angle, and customer service was the most obvious one if they weren't going to just simply compete on cost. So they started looking at the key types of customer journeys that would make a difference. And several come to mind. Doing a move. So you're going to move your house. You want to be able to move your account. You want to be able to move access to your cable TV and to your internet, and you want to be able to do that seamlessly. There's a lot of different parties involved in that: billing, installation, possibly credit. All of those have to be strung together to make that work. They also realized that a lot of the marketing that they did was leading to dissatisfaction when people had their first bill because they didn't understand charges on that bill. And they thought they were getting certain deals that weren't very clear. And so there would be dissatisfaction and a lot of calls into the customer service center when people got their first bill. So they started looking at a journey which was from marketing to first bill. And that has a whole end-to-end series of different functional groups that work together, and especially onboarding. When someone actually becomes a new customer, let's show them, for example, a video, a customized video that explains to them what it is they're actually getting and how it all works. And they have made tremendous strides in terms of their Net Promoter Score, their retention rate. And when they launched Xfinity Mobile, using this whole philosophy of journeys from scratch, within 2 years, they became the top J.D. Powers pick in terms of customer service in mobile telephony for 3 years straight, which they still have today. So there's a mindset to customer experience that you have to get into. But there's also new capabilities, especially data capabilities, that are now coming to the fore. I'm going to share a few, not many slides with you that explain capabilities that are making this managing of journeys a lot easier to do. So let me just get this up on the screen. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the first I want to talk about is a company called Sunday Sky that enables you to create those personalized videos. When I was chief marketing officer at Aetna, we realized health insurance is unbelievably complicated. When you sign up for health insurance, you don't really understand how premiums, co-pays, co-insurance, deductibles. We did a survey of members to see if they understood those terms. Maybe 10% understood all four accurately. And because they don't understand it, they do things like go to doctors out of network, or they don't understand bills. They are unhappy. They call in. Aspects of their care could suffer. And so we use Sunday Sky to create personalized videos for every member to explain their specific health plan. 70% of people to whom we sent the link to watched a 4-minute video all the way through. And those people who watched it churned at a lower rate, way fewer calls into the call center, and interestingly, spent less time in the emergency room. Because one of the things we talked about was we gave people addresses of local urgent care centers that were in network that they could go to, that were near them, so that they wouldn't have to go to an emergency room. Here's a very simple example of how Sunday Sky works. This is for a company called Naked Wines. So it doesn't necessarily have to just be big companies. And here's an example of it being used from a sales perspective for animating a digital ad, where first you have an opening scene that, based on data you may have about this person from the past, whether they like white wine, red wine, mixed wine, the opening scene, then depending on the mindset of the individual, whether they're high end and what they bought before. And then the third scene is a customized call to action. What kind of discount or incentive would you give them? Or maybe you don't need one at all, depending on the situation. And so being able to do this at scale with video capabilities, and they already have tons of pre-filmed scenes that you can use. They have access to the Getty library and things like that. It opens up a very different way of thinking about interactions because video is so much more powerful than text. The next one I want to talk about is a company called OfferFit. And if you happen to see, I co-authored a recent article in the Harvard Business Review just a couple of months ago called Customer Experience in the Age of AI. And the opening vignette of that is OfferFit, working with Brinks Home Security. And what OfferFit does is it allows you to test all kinds of possible variations of the message, the content, the pictures, the timing, the channel, in order to accomplish some goal with a customer. In the case of Brinks, one of their most important things is people renewing their contract for home security. And they used to just do a very simple A/B test to try two different variations and maybe two different kinds of discounts. But the reality is there's so many different variables. Some people may not need a discount. Some people, maybe if you just bundle in an upgrade to wireless, you could get them to do it. Depending on the time of when you should send it, it could vary. And so this is massive multivariate testing, essentially automated experimentation of innovation. And it's using AI to structure the tests, figure out all the different test cells. You decide the variations you want to test. OfferFit decides the combinations, and then based on data about individuals, how to set up the test cells. It looks at how people respond, and it continuously optimizes. And you can keep putting in more and more different variations. And what you see here with Brinks is basically a 4x ROI on what they had been doing before. And the CEO, Bill Niles of Home Brinks, is actually on tour talking about this and how he's transforming his company around using AI and combining that with a journey view to now take this and use this to take people all the way through an installation, a service journey. And he's really thinking about customer experience and personalization at a whole new level, armed with this kind of artificial intelligence capability. And then the last one I'd like to talk about is a company called Pointillist. Pointillist allows you to see what's actually happening in customer journeys. So they use AI in two different ways, two different AI engines. The first AI engine finds an individual across all the different databases that the marketer makes available. So Comcast uses this. They have embedded Pointillist across. So looking across their billing system, their service history system, even what people actually click on when they're using their cable TV, their marketing contacts, all of that. They're all in separate databases. They're all in different schema. And instead of creating a grand new, grand master integrated, all singing, all dancing database, Pointillist can actually use AI to go in and find matches based on a percentage likelihood of somebody being a match because of various things that are likely to be in common. and it assembles a database on the fly of all the touches that you've had and timestamps them and puts them in a sequence. And so you actually see the customer journey. And you can look at it at an individual level where you can see what happened to somebody specifically. So, for example, if a person had a problem and calls into a call center rep, that rep can immediately know where the customer had been before and what the problem had likely been, and have a prompt popped up right away of what they should do by the time they even answer the call. Or you can look at it in aggregate and spot broader problems, such as calls from people who are trying to use the Android version of the are spiking now in the call center. Well, why is that? Did they have a problem paying the bill? What's going on? But it is spiking. Oh, we just launched a new version. We just got that out. Maybe there's a bug in the Android version of our app. We better deal with it. And you get an immediate alert, and you can fix it and then actually see, using this tool, what happened to people after you fixed it. You can also use this tool to come up with new ideas for different kinds of journeys, inserting new kinds of content pages or videos in an experience and seeing whether that personalized video that you just put in during onboarding actually does, in fact, drive people to better behaviors versus calling into the call center. You can literally see that and track it. So this is a breakthrough to be able to actually see, understand, and manage journeys. And so that's really the philosophy that I want to make sure everybody starts to get their heads around, because it's not just about what happened in the call center. So when I was turned down for that credit card, when I talked about being in the chocolate shop in Paris, I received a survey asking me how I felt about the interaction with the rep. And they asked me, was she efficient? Was she good? Yeah, she was. She was doing what she should be doing, and it was perfectly fine, but I shouldn't have had to do it in the first place. It was looking at a very narrow aspect of the experience and not at the total journey. And so this linkage between thinking about journeys and taking advantage of new technology capabilities is what is fostering breakthroughs in customer experience that are already driving breakthroughs in terms of brand preference. And so I'm a former consultant, worked at McKinsey and BCG, and we like to come up with cute little acronyms. So it's a way to make it easy to talk about the steps involved in actually pursuing something like this. So using the acronym IDEAL, 5 things to keep in mind. Now, I realize these are at a high level, but if you actually think through what it would take to do, you can get down to a much more concrete action plan. The first is thinking about how you can integrate, manage, and draw insights from a much broader range of data signals. So in the case of Sungevity, they knew that my town just passed something that gave incentives for solar. They looked at Google Earth to find homes that might be suitable for solar. They used Zillow to figure out the percent. So all of that was quite a broad range of data signals that they were able to pull together. Then think about what would the right seamless experience be that can be powered by automated support. So the flow of what I experienced at Sungevity, I spoke with their chief marketing officer, and she told me, it didn't happen overnight. They had a general sense of what they should do, but it took a lot of very deliberate trial and error, working things through, training the reps, figuring out the right way to do the interfaces for the customer, for the reps, the design of all of that. But they were determined to make it flow. Their whole approach was that this was going to be a seamless journey that would never hit a dead end, where the customer would never have to give us a whole bunch of new information. It would just flow. Then you got to reach out to the customer wherever they are and make it clear that the way you're interacting with them is of value, and the way you're using data will be a strong indicator of that. So sending me a personalized URL with information of how I can save on solar, that is extremely powerful. Sending me a personalized video that helps me understand my health plan, that's something that has value. Okay, the recording's back. A company is how to bring that into the philosophy of management and make it just part of the way people are thinking. New services. When I look at companies who have been putting this together, generally I think about it as 70, about 20% is about the data and making sure you're being disciplined and deliberate about the data. And then 10% good technology, but you can do a lot for many companies with technology they may already have. To the organization stuff, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges. If you remember when I was talking about and we did the same thing at Aetna, it's around bringing people together to look at a journey. And actually, in some respects, thinking about the journey as a product that you offer, where there's a group of people from different functions. It could be led by a marketing strategist. It could be led by somebody from product, be led by service ops. Probably, though, either the product or is usually where that happens, where there is a team around that person of people who are doing analytics, they're doing design, there's marketing operations, then there's service, and there's digital operations. Depending on what's needed in that journey, they are working together. It could be physically, although in today's world, it'll be virtually, but they have goals together working. And so they are trying to hit certain targets in terms of what they want to accomplish with their journeys, such as reducing the number of call centers. That's a very popular one. How do we cut the volume of calls, not just from a cost perspective, because often it's a dissatisfaction as well, and or are there positive actions that we want to get people to take, and how do we design the journey to get people to take those positive actions, such as in our case, use an urgent care center instead of the ER. And there's all kinds of things like that where the team is working together on a set of goals. But doing that, to work together, requires thinking from an organization perspective of how you're going to make that work, allocating people to the journeys to focus. So Comcast has about 13 different journeys that has teams organized against. And that's a very powerful concept to them. And the incentives for those people are primarily based on the performance of their journeys. They're looking at data. They have their eyes on point list every day, looking at what's going on in those journeys and seeing what they've got to do. They have processes behind them so that when things screw up, they know who to call and stuff gets done quickly. They have hotlines to the right people who can fix things. They also have legal support on call, so they don't have to wait forever for compliance and legal review to get things out the door. So things are organized towards journeys and towards speed. And that's a big difference for many companies.
Thank you, David. One of the things that you were talking about, and this actually dovetails into another question, is there such a thing as information overload? And speaking to the amount of testing and data that is collected, and do you have any advice for what data points are most important to understanding the customer experience?
Yeah, there certainly you could have data overload, especially if you're looking through it manually. One of the interesting things that a lot of these AI tools now are starting to do is use that data productively and insulate you from that data, providing insights, graphic renditions of what's going on, things that can help you understand what's going on without you having to be as dirty in the data. So, for example, Comcast saw how many data scientists, if they were going to scale journeys, they would likely need to do all the analytics. And with Pointillist, they did not have to grow the number anywhere near as much. They didn't let anyone go. They still needed to hire, of course, but nowhere near the scale they had originally estimated because the tools were able to take care of it. In terms of what data to look at, it depends a lot on the design of the journeys that you're looking at. Generally, I find there's three things that you should always keep in mind. One is context. What data do you have? Can you have about where somebody is in their journey? What was the last thing they clicked on? What was the last thing they called in about? Where is somebody? That is often a trigger for some kind of follow-up action in a journey. The second is anything about the customer's history and preferences, what they have responded to, what has worked for them, how they have, any kind of promotional activity, all of that. And then the other part of data is on the back end, understanding what's happened, being able to measure the outcome of what you are doing. So there's input, there's output. You got to garbage in, garbage out, but you got to be able to really think about the data on both sides of the actions you're taking.
Thank you, David. One of the things that you mentioned was getting as much information from your customers as possible. And Apple has certainly taken some steps to keep customer information private. And in the future, that may become even more so as more companies do that. So some potential customers may engage in activities to prevent marketers from finding personal information about the individual, such as using certain platforms that allow it, or by disguising their real estate purchases through trust or whatever. Do companies recognize some of these individuals are offended by the use of their data and they're using their personal information, and what do they do about it?
Absolutely. Every time I talk about this, privacy is huge. There are a few things to think about. First is the difference between first-party data and third-party data. So the vast majority of the examples that I gave were first-party data. Now, what Sungevity did in terms of looking at Google Earth images and looking at Zillow, that is third-party data, but it's out there and it's skimmable, and they're putting it together to create some kind of value. Browsing history or things that you've done in media, your use of one app and selling that data to another. Yeah, third-party cookie deprecation is real. It's going to grow. It's already taken $10 billion out of Facebook's pocket. So it's important to get first-party data as much as possible. So in the process of interacting with people, making sure that you can actually get their preferences and open up access to their data because you're offering them something in exchange. Too often, I find that a lot of the asking for permission to use people's data just says, it's just a box to click, you'll get marketing stuff. Better ones would actually say, would you let us use your data to improve your access to healthcare providers in your neighborhood? Or things like that, and get more value into that. Frankly, what we've seen, and there actually was a very interesting survey done by Google and BCG about people's attitude towards information use. And the general sense was, if it's really adding value to me versus just creepily trying to pitch me things, I like that. That's what I would expect you to do. If I'm, a bank customer who repeatedly goes over my balance, help me find a way to manage my financials in a smarter way. So people expect that more and more. And I think there's also a generational issue here of younger people just being much more comfortable with it. And that's a line where you're just going to have to test it. Bottom line always being it's a value exchange.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that this may bring about is user fatigue. So, how do marketing professionals understand and avoid user fatigue? How do they also make sure that everything is safe and user friendly for their people and their products?
Not sure I understand what you mean by user fatigue, but if it's just too many interactions, people are going to start tuning out. We actually did a study at Aetna looking at the number of contacts that we had with an individual and how often they engaged. And it was quite interesting. As soon as we hit over 4 interactions in a month, it plummeted. And basically, people just thought it was all spam. It was useless because there was just too much stuff. And so we started to think about customer contact as a scarce resource that we needed to prioritize when or whom we would when we would touch whom. And that you hear a lot of terms like next best action. That's a nice language for what to do next with somebody. But if you're really managing right, you should be thinking about the next best action and make trade-offs that it's not okay to just have one part of the company just pitch crap at customers of another division if it's really not in that customer's best interest versus other things that you can do for that customer. And sometimes there's really tough trade-offs that you have to make in terms of actual access to customers. Those are some of the things that come up along the way, which is managing customer communication streams and being smart about that. It often happens in multi-division companies where everybody wants to hit the same customers as often as possible because they have some kind of relationship with the brand. And that's where often centers of excellence in a marketing organization do set up things like we did. We had a customer communications council that set up a hierarchy of what would go to whom so that we weren't spamming them anymore.
Thank you, David. Can you speak to your 70-20-10 rule?
Yeah, sure. If you've got cool tools and you're not set up as an organization to think about how you would work together to manage somebody, those cool tools are kind of useless. And so the operational capabilities to use this stuff are more significant than the tools themselves, because I bet there's a lot of large companies that have Salesforce, Adobe. They have every possible tool that they need. They are not getting the value out of those. Often it's because they're not managing in terms of bringing together the experience. So there's a term we use a lot now, which are called agile teams. It comes from software development of having a group of people working together towards a goal. You've heard scrum teams, things like that, where they're managing in tight cycles, often as short as a week or 2 weeks. And we actually set up agile marketing for 4 different parts of our business, in different customer segments. And we pointed them towards journeys, one of the biggest ones for us being everything about onboarding. And those agile teams have a backlog of things they're going to test, areas they're going to innovate, and they are working together to constantly see what works and what doesn't. So, for example, our teams across all of the agile teams, everybody had an 11 a.m. stand up for their team where they would all look at the data, see what they've learned from the last day, and figure out what the implications of it are for what they should be doing going forward. And we had cross-functional teams working together from, for example, our call center, our agent, we had third-party agent management, marketing, analytics. We had finance, somebody from finance often in there because decisions would have to be made that could require more funding or not. And the finance people helped us do the business case. We had legal people on tap. So working together towards goals in fast cycles makes a huge difference. And having looked at the processes behind that to get rid of everything that slows you down is just as important to moving fast. So, what's the point of having real time data that tells you there's a problem with your app if you can't act on it quickly? So, the technology, yeah, that's valuable, but you got to act on it. And so, you need the organization and process to do that.
Thank you. You worked at Aetna, and what event or was there a performance issue, maybe it was market share or whatever, that compelled Aetna and you to embark on this path, or was it organic?
There was a very major issue, which was as an insurance company. So I was brought on as the first chief marketing officer at Aetna in 2016. Marketing was not a very major strategic part of the company. The CEO, Mark Bertolini, though, said, we can't just be a commodity insurer competing mostly on cost and coverage. We have to rethink the equation and help people lower healthcare costs and help people get healthier, make the system work. And so that required a very different attitude that would look at the brand. And as we started doing it, we saw which processes were in our way. We saw what data we needed. We saw what tools we would need. We started with it pretty manually. It wasn't that fast, but eventually we started building up the pace. And within 2 years, we had over $50 million in incremental profit from those kinds of actions. So it was serious. And then we started expanding that to areas like small business sales, Medicare sales, various other parts of the business as well. But a lot of it came from how do we engage to create a different kind of healthcare journey and different relationship with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We only have so many questions to choose from here. I really applaud Rachel because I don't know how she manages it all. I'm going to ask this one. Is there a cultural or a leadership profile for better customer service businesses? Is there a certain profile?
Lots of different leaders whom I've met. I think one of the biggest ones is people who are always asking, what's the impact to the customer? What data do we have on the impact of the customer? And is there actually a trade-off where we're trying to make more money, but the customer is not better off? And putting that on the table for actual discussion. I was very lucky to have two consecutive CEOs, Mark Bertolini and then Karen Lynch, who became the CEO of CVS, who were very, very, we call them members, member-oriented, who were always putting those kinds of questions on the table, constantly pushing for data. And frankly, they also changed our incentive plan. 20% of executive bonuses were tied to various kinds of customer satisfaction measures. That's serious. That gets attention. We first had to put the capabilities in place to manage it. So I was in charge of getting that set up. And then we started to look at the data, see what the baselines were, and start setting targets. And so when you have everyone around the leadership table, 20% of their bonus, depending on this, that gets serious and people play ball.
Thank you, David. One final question, and we only have time for one more. Many organizations have data, but struggle to translate that data into insight. Poor interpretation of data can be quite misleading and consume a substantial amount of organizational resources at best, or misguide the organization at worst. Do you have any suggestions for ensuring that insights generated from data are both accurate and generate high impact?
Well, accuracy is hard to say per se, besides in some respects having people who really understand the business doing the data analysis. I think one of the most important things is the analytics cannot be people in a back room who are just crunching numbers, but really tied to the business, understanding what is actually happening with customers, putting it in the context of the business, where the business is trying to figure out trade offs, priorities from that. So, marrying analytics with business partners is one of the most powerful ways. It's also then the best way to make sure stuff happens because business people have been part of this and they actually see the opportunity. And then if you're in the kinds of agile teams I'm talking about where you've got targets, you're looking for insights that can move the needle, you're going to test things out. I think one of the great things about some of the new AI technologies is it allows you to test and to actually innovate in a lower cost, lower risk way. So it makes the pain of a misguided insight lower if you can test on a small scale, measure it, and manage it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. I'm going to turn it back over to Manish, who will close us out. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
It takes me 5 minutes, David, to unmute and put myself back on camera. So keep clicking on that button and it just doesn't come up. So David, what a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing your research, your perspectives, your experiences in the various businesses and roles that you have been in, from Aetna to CVS to McKinsey to BCG, using AI to deliver more personalized customer experience. I think I speak for all of us, my colleagues, and anyone else on the call, that I think higher education can certainly benefit from all the experiences and all the activities that you've undertaken, most definitely. And I think we've got ways to catch up to where the Aetnas and the CVS of the world are. But I think it's great insight. Thank you so much for taking the time. And in the future, let's look you up for a Boston Tea Party, as I mentioned on Friday. We'll collapse our schedule together and see if there is a chance to have a cup of tea with you in Boston. So, David, it has been my honor hosting you. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with all of us. Appreciate it. And as we close out this edition of Vantage Point, we encourage all of you to stay tuned for future events and visit our ERAU Worldwide YouTube channel for on-demand recordings of the past events. So until then, I wish everybody safe health and safe well-being. So take care, everyone. Have a great evening. David, once more, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.